I had always loved camping. Something about the quiet solitude of the forest brought me a strange sense of comfort. So when my friends cancelled on our annual camping trip to Whispering Pines, a secluded forest known for its beauty and untouched wildlife, I decided to go alone. I'd been there many times before, but this trip felt different. I couldn't shake the feeling that something in the woods was waiting for me. I arrived just before dusk, setting up camp under a canopy of towering pines that reached into a darkening sky. The silence of the forest enveloped me as I pitched my tent and started a small fire. Despite the stillness, there was an edge to the air that set my nerves on edge. The towering pines whispered with the wind, filling the silence with eerie creaks and rustling leaves. I brushed off the unease, telling myself I was just spooking myself with unnecessary fears. As night deepened, the darkness grew thick, pressing in from all sides. The stars provided little light under the dense tree cover, and my fire became my only source of comfort. But soon, the forest grew silent. It was as if the entire forest held its breath, waiting for something unseen. I tried to relax, convincing myself it was just the forest's natural lull, but the silence was unnatural, oppressive. Every crackle of the fire seemed deafening, filling the air around me with a tension that made my skin crawl. Then, I heard it, a faint whisper, just beyond the edge of the firelight. It was so soft I almost thought I'd imagined it. I held my breath, straining my ears to listen. The whisper came again, this time clearer, as if someone was speaking just out of sight. But when I turned, there was no one there. My heart pounded in my chest as I searched the dark forest around me, seeing nothing but shadows. "Hello," I called, my voice shaky and weak. The whisper stopped, leaving an uncomfortable silence in its wake. I felt a chill run down my spine as I backed toward the fire, clutching my flashlight. My mind raced with explanations, trying to reason away the whisper as nothing more than my imagination. But deep down, I knew something was watching me. Hours passed, and though the whisper didn't return, the sense of being watched didn't fade. I barely slept, keeping my flashlight within arm's reach and starting at every small sound. Finally, I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, dawn was breaking, casting a soft glow over the campsite. I packed up quickly, eager to leave the forest, but part of me wanted to understand what had happened the night before. On my way out, I noticed strange footprints near my campsite, large, clawed prints that didn't resemble any animal I knew. They circled my campfire in a tight loop, as if whatever made them had been watching me all night. A chill ran down my spine as I traced the path of the footprints, leading deeper into the woods. Against my better judgment, I decided to follow them. The footprints wound through the forest, leading me down a narrow path lined with trees so dense they blocked out the sunlight. I kept my guard up, feeling the weight of the forest around me. The whispers returned, faint and indistinct, echoing from somewhere deep within the trees. My skin prickled with fear, but my curiosity drove me onward. After nearly an hour of walking, I found myself in a small clearing. The grass was flattened, and the ground was littered with animal bones, picked clean and scattered across the forest floor. My stomach churned at the sight, and I considered turning back. But then I noticed something carved into the trunk of a nearby tree, strange symbols, etched deep into the bark, each one twisted and jagged, like claws had gouged them out. They pulsed with an otherworldly energy, sending a wave of nausea through me. Before I could move, a sound filled the clearing, a low, guttural growl, echoing from the shadows just beyond my line of sight. I froze, heart hammering as I searched the darkness for the source. The growling grew louder, closer, vibrating through the ground beneath my feet. Slowly, I backed away, not daring to take my eyes off the shadows. But the moment I moved, the growling stopped, replaced by a deafening silence. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I turned and ran, tearing through the forest, branches clawing at my skin as I stumbled over roots and rocks. The whispers followed me, louder and more desperate, filling my mind with a chilling urgency I couldn't ignore. Finally, I broke free of the trees, stumbling into the clearing where my car was parked. I didn't look back as I threw myself into the driver's seat, starting the engine with shaking hands. As I sped away from the forest, I glanced in the rearview mirror. For a split second, I thought I saw something standing at the edge of the trees, a tall, shadowy figure with eyes that glowed like embers, watching me with an intensity that sent a fresh wave of terror through me. I didn't stop driving until I was miles away from Whispering Pines, my mind reeling from what I'd seen. The forest had been watching me, waiting for me, and I had no doubt that if I'd stayed any longer, I wouldn't have made it out alive. The whispers and the shadows had been real, a dark presence lurking within the trees, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to wander into its domain. Since that day, I've never gone camping alone again. The memory of that night haunts me, filling my dreams with shadows and whispers. And every so often, when I close my eyes, I can still feel the forest watching me, waiting for me to return. We had all been looking forward to the sleepover at Lily's house for weeks. It was her 15th birthday, and her parents had promised her the best party yet, a movie marathon, midnight snacks, and no bedtime. Her house was tucked away in a quiet suburb, surrounded by a thick row of trees. It was the perfect setting for a sleepover, cozy, secluded, and far away from the prying eyes of parents. There were 5 of us, me, Lily, Jenna, Ava, and Chloe. We had been best friends since middle school, and this sleepover was our tradition, something we did every few months. But this one I'll never forget. We arrived at Lily's just as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across her front yard. Her mom had already decorated the living room with balloons and banners, and the smell of freshly baked pizza filled the air. We dumped our bags in Lily's room and immediately headed downstairs to the living room, where the TV was set up for the movie marathon. "Okay, what's first on the list?" Ava asked, grabbing the remote and plopping down on the couch. Lily grinned, holding up a stack of DVDs. "Horror movies, of course. You guys ready?" I wasn't much for horror movies, but I wasn't about to be the only one who chickened out. I settled onto the couch between Jenna and Chloe, grabbing a slice of pizza as the opening credits of the first movie rolled. For the next couple of hours, we watched a series of jump scares, creepy music, and ghosts lurking in the shadows. But nothing about the movies compared to what happened later that night. It was around midnight when we finally turned off the TV. Lily's parents had gone to bed, and the house was dark and quiet. We were all in that giggly, overtired stage, whispering and laughing about random things. Lily suggested we move upstairs to her bedroom to play some games and snack on the junk food we had stashed. As we were getting up to go, Chloe's face suddenly froze, her eyes fixed on the window. "Did you guys hear that?" she whispered. We all stopped, listening. At first, there was nothing, just the soft hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. But then we heard it, a faint tapping sound like something, or someone, knocking on the window. Lily laughed nervously. It's probably just the wind. These windows always rattle when it's breezy. No, Chloe said, her voice a bit more urgent now. It sounded like someone knocking. We all exchanged uneasy glances. Lily walked over to the window, pulling back the curtains to reveal nothing but darkness. The yard was still, the trees swaying slightly in the night breeze. See? It's nothing, she said, letting the curtains fall back into place. Come on, let's go upstairs. We grabbed our snacks and started up the stairs, trying to shake off the weird feeling that had settled over the group. Lily's bedroom was a safe haven, bright, cheerful, with fairy lights strung across the walls and a fluffy white carpet in the middle of the room. We dumped our snacks on her bed and sat down in a circle, ready for the next phase of the night. Jenna pulled out her phone. Truth or dare? She asked, raising an eyebrow. Oh no, Ava groaned. We all know how this ends, but we all agreed anyway. It was part of the tradition. We started with some light dares, eating weird combinations of snacks, texting silly things to each other's crush. It was all fun and games until Chloe, clearly still rattled from earlier, dared Lily to do something we would all regret. I dare you to summon a spirit, Chloe said, her voice low and serious. We all laughed at first, thinking she was joking. But the look on her face told us she wasn't. Are you serious? Lily asked, her smile faltering. Come on, it's just a game, Chloe said, though she looked genuinely intrigued. You've been talking about this house being haunted for years, right? Let's see if it really is. Lily hesitated for a moment, but then shrugged. Fine. But I don't know how to do that. Jenna, always the one with random knowledge, pulled out her phone and started searching. There's a simple one, light a candle, ask the spirit to come forward, and wait for a sign. This is ridiculous, Eva muttered. But fine, I'll go get a candle. A few minutes later, we were sitting in a circle again, a single candle flickering in the center of the room. The air felt colder, and a strange tension settled over us. Lily took a deep breath. Okay, here goes. Spirit, if you're here, give us a sign. We all held our breath, waiting. At first, nothing happened. The room was silent except for the sound of our breathing. I was about to laugh it off when the candle flickered. Not a small flicker, but a sudden, violent gust, as if someone had blown on it. Did you see that? Jenna whispered, her eyes wide. Maybe it's the air conditioning, I offered, though my heart was racing. There's no vent near here, Lily said, her voice barely above a whisper. Suddenly, we heard it again, that tapping sound. But this time, it was louder, more distinct. It wasn't coming from the window. It was coming from the closet. We all turned to look at the closed closet door. It was an old, wooden door with a brass handle, and it had always been a little creepy. But now, in the dim light of the candle, it seemed to loom larger, more menacing. Stop messing with us, Eva said, her voice shaky. I'm not, Chloe whispered, her eyes glued to the closet. Then, as if in response to her words, the door creaked open, just an inch. We all screamed, scrambling to our feet. The candle tipped over, plunging the room into darkness. Lily fumbled for the light switch, and when the lights flickered on, the closet door was wide open. But there was nothing inside, just clothes hanging neatly, shoes on the floor. Nothing that could explain the knocking or the door opening on its own. Okay, I'm done, Eva said, backing toward the door. This isn't funny anymore. None of us argued. We grabbed our sleeping bags and pillows, deciding to camp out in the living room instead of staying in Lily's room. But even downstairs, the feeling of unease lingered. Every little sound made us jump, and none of us could sleep. Around 3 a.m., when the house was at its quietest, I heard it again. The tapping, but this time, it wasn't coming from the window or the closet. It was coming from inside the house, slow, deliberate knocks, as if someone was walking down the hallway, tapping on each door. I held my breath, squeezing my eyes shut, hoping it was just my imagination. But then I felt it, a cold breeze brushing against my cheek, as if someone was standing right next to me. I opened my eyes, expecting to see one of the girls, but there was no one there. The room was dark, except for the faint glow of the streetlight outside. Suddenly, I heard a soft whisper, "Come play with us." I bolted upright, looking around frantically. The others were all asleep, their faces pale and still. But there, at the edge of the room, standing in the shadows, I saw them, two small figures, their faces obscured, their hands raised as if beckoning me. I screamed, waking everyone up. They turned on the lights, and the figures were gone. But I know what I saw. And I'll never forget the cold, hollow eyes staring at me from the darkness. It was a Saturday night, and sleepovers at Rachel's house were a regular thing for our group. Her house was big, with winding hallways and countless rooms, most of them unused since her parents were away a lot. To us, it was like our own little castle where we could stay up late, tell ghost stories, and eat all the junk food we could find. But there was always something a little strange about Rachel's house, a feeling that I could never quite shake. That night, it was just me, Rachel, and Mia. Our other friends had bailed at the last minute, so the three of us decided to make the most of it. We had set up camp in Rachel's bedroom, a massive room with a canopy bed, large windows, and a thick, dark carpet that muffled every footstep. The floor, too, ceiling bookshelves were filled with old books, and there was a wardrobe that looked like it had been there for centuries. But the thing that always gave me the creeps was the collection of dolls that Rachel kept in her room. There were dozens of them, sitting on shelves, perched on her dresser, and even lying on the window seat. Their glassy eyes followed you wherever you went, and no matter how many times I told her they were creepy, Rachel always insisted that they were harmless. "They're just dolls," she would say, laughing it off. We had just finished watching a movie, one of those campy slasher films where the killer is always lurking just around the corner. Rachel had turned off the TV, and the room was lit only by the dim glow of a bedside lamp. The shadows in the room seemed to stretch farther than they should, and I kept catching glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye. "Let's play a game," Mia suggested, breaking the silence. "Truth or dare?" Rachel asked, raising an eyebrow. "No, something scarier," Mia said with a mischievous grin. "What about Bloody Mary?" I groaned. "Seriously?" "We're not 12. Rachel, however, looked intrigued. "I've never done it." "Is it really that scary?" Mia nodded. "It's creepy, but it's just a game. We go to the bathroom, turn off the lights, and say her name 3 times while looking in the mirror. Supposedly, she's supposed to appear." Rachel rolled her eyes. "Okay, I'll do it. But if I get murdered by a ghost, I'm haunting both of you." We all laughed, but there was a nervous edge to it. None of us really believed in the whole Bloody Mary thing, but being in Rachel's room with those creepy dolls staring at us made everything feel more unsettling than usual. Rachel got up and walked to the bathroom, Mia and I following close behind. We squeezed into the small space, giggling nervously as Rachel closed the door and turned off the lights. The bathroom was plunged into darkness, and I could barely see the outlines of their faces in the dim reflection of the mirror. "Okay, here goes," Rachel said. "Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary." We waited, the silence hanging heavy in the air. For a moment, nothing happened. But then, from the hallway, we heard a soft creak, like the sound of someone walking across the wooden floor outside the bathroom. "What was that?" I whispered. Rachel flicked the light back on, and we all stared at each other, wide-eyed. "It's probably just the house settling," she said, though she didn't sound convinced. Mia opened the bathroom door and peeked out into the hallway. "There's no one here," she said, but her voice was shaky. "Let's just go back to the room." We hurried back to Rachel's room, closing the door behind us. I felt a chill run down my spine as I glanced at the dolls. They were all still sitting in their usual places, but something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but it was as if they were watching us more closely now, their glassy eyes more intense. Mia plopped down on Rachel's bed, grabbing a pillow and hugging it to her chest. "Okay, maybe that was a bad idea," she admitted. "Let's just play truth or dare." We tried to relax, but there was a tension in the air that hadn't been there before. Every creak of the house, every whisper of wind outside, made us jump. It wasn't long before Rachel started yawning, and Mia followed suit. We decided to call it a night. Rachel climbed into her bed, pulling the covers up to her chin. Mia and I unrolled our sleeping bags on the floor. I was right next to the bed, and I couldn't help but feel like something was wrong. The feeling of being watched was stronger now, and I kept glancing at the dolls, half expecting one of them to move. "Good night, guys," Rachel said, turning off the lamp. We all mumbled good night, but sleep didn't come easily. I lay there in the darkness, listening to the steady breathing of Rachel and Mia as they drifted off. But something was keeping me awake, a feeling like there was something in the room with us. I rolled over onto my side, my face inches from the edge of Rachel's bed. That's when I heard it, a soft scraping sound, like something being dragged across the floor. My heart skipped a beat, and I held my breath, listening. The sound was coming from under Rachel's bed. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't move. My body was frozen with fear. Slowly, I turned my head, peering into the darkness beneath the bed. At first, I saw nothing, just shadows. But then, something moved. A small figure, no bigger than a doll, crawled out from under the bed, its limbs jerking unnaturally as it pulled itself toward me. I gasped, scrambling to my feet and backing away from the bed. Rachel and Mia woke up with a start, their eyes wide with confusion. "What's wrong?" Rachel asked, sitting up in bed. "There's something under your bed," I whispered, my voice shaking. Rachel blinked in the darkness, confused. "What are you talking about?" But before I could answer, the scraping sound started again. This time, it was louder, and it wasn't just coming from under the bed. It was coming from all around us. The dolls, they were moving. One by one, the dolls on Rachel's shelves and dresser began to twitch, their tiny limbs jerking as they slowly turned their heads toward us. Their glassy eyes, once lifeless, now gleamed with something dark and malevolent. Rachel screamed, scrambling out of bed and backing into the corner of the room. Mia grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin as we both stood frozen in terror. The dolls started to move faster now, some of them climbing down from the shelves, others dragging themselves across the floor toward us. The scraping sound grew louder, filling the room with a deafening cacophony of tiny feet and hands scratching against the wood. "What do we do?" Mia cried, her voice shaking with panic. Rachel was in tears, her back pressed against the wall. I don't know. I glanced around the room, my mind racing. We had to get out, but the door was blocked by the dolls. They were everywhere now, surrounding us, their tiny faces twisted into grotesque smiles. Suddenly, one of the dolls lunged at me, its small hands clawing at my legs. I kicked it away, but more of them were coming, swarming us like insects. Mia screamed as one of the dolls grabbed her hair, pulling her to the ground. "Get off her," I shouted, stomping on the doll until it stopped moving. Rachel ran for the window, throwing it open and looking back at us. "We have to go now." Mia and I scrambled to our feet, dodging the dolls as we made our way to the window. Rachel climbed out first, dropping down onto the roof of the porch below. Mia went next, and I followed, my heart pounding in my chest. We didn't stop running until we were halfway down the street, gasping for breath. The house loomed behind us, dark and silent, but I knew those dolls were still in there, waiting. Rachel's parents never believed us when we told them what happened. They said it was just a bad dream, that we had gotten scared and imagined the whole thing, but I know what I saw. Those dolls weren't just toys, they were alive. I had never been one to shy away from Craigslist for buying and selling things. The deals you could find were too good to resist sometimes. So, when my old car broke down and I needed a new vehicle fast, I figured I'd try my luck on Craigslist once again. I'd had good luck in the past, buying a cheap guitar, some second-hand furniture. How bad could buying a car be? The ad that caught my attention seemed almost too good to be true. A 2005 white Ford Econoline van, low mileage, clean title, and the asking price was way under market value. It was the perfect vehicle for the small handyman business I had just started, and I could even use it for camping trips on weekends. I had been looking for a van for weeks, but nothing had really worked for my budget. This one seemed perfect. The seller, a man named Greg, responded quickly to my inquiry. He told me that he had recently inherited the van from his late father and didn't need it. He sounded genuine over the phone and explained that he was just trying to get rid of it quickly, which was why the price was low. We agreed to meet at his place the next day so I could check it out. Greg lived on the outskirts of town, in a rural area I wasn't too familiar with. The directions he gave me led me to a dirt road that twisted through dense woods. His house was an old, run-down farmhouse that had seen better days. The paint was peeling, and the yard was overgrown with weeds. I pulled up the gravel driveway, feeling a bit uneasy, but I reminded myself that Craigslist deals were often like this, people trying to offload stuff from places that had long since seen better days. Greg greeted me with a smile as I stepped out of my car. He was a tall, thin man, probably in his late 40s, wearing a faded baseball cap and a pair of dirty jeans. His handshake was firm but cold. "Thanks for coming all the way out here," he said. "The van's out back." I followed him around the side of the house, my eyes scanning the place as we walked. There were old, rusted tools scattered across the yard, and a few broken, down cars sat in various states of disrepair near the barn. It felt like a junkyard, but I told myself not to judge too harshly. Some people just didn't care about appearances. When we reached the van, I was pleasantly surprised. It was in much better condition than I had expected based on the house. The paint was a little faded, but the body was solid. There was no rust, no dents, and the tires looked brand new. Greg opened the driver's door and gestured for me to check it out. I climbed inside, inhaling the faint smell of old fabric mixed with a hint of something I couldn't quite place. The interior was clean, though dated. It looked like it had barely been used, just like Greg had said. "Mind if I take it for a spin?" I asked. "Go ahead," Greg said, tossing me the keys. "Take your time. I'll be right here when you get back." I drove the van down the dirt road, taking it through a few twists and turns. It drove smoothly, the engine was quiet, and the brakes were responsive. Everything checked out. By the time I pulled back into Greg's driveway, I was ready to make an offer. "I'll take it," I said, hopping out of the van. "This is exactly what I've been looking for." Greg nodded, a slight smile on his lips. "Glad to hear it. Let's head inside to do the paperwork." I followed him into the house, which was just as run down inside as it was outside. The floors creaked underfoot, and the air smelled stale, like it hadn't been aired out in years. Greg led me to a small kitchen table where a stack of papers sat waiting. I glanced around, noticing the peeling wallpaper and the flickering overhead light. As we went over the details, Greg seemed eager to finish the deal quickly. He didn't make much small talk, just pushed the paperwork toward me and handed over the title. We exchanged cash, shook hands again, and I was out the door, driving my new van back home. The next couple of weeks went by without incident. The van was everything I had hoped it would be, reliable, spacious, and perfect for hauling tools. But then, strange things started happening. It started with the smell. That faint odor I had noticed when I first got into the van grew stronger each day. At first, I thought it was just the old fabric, maybe some mildew in the upholstery, but it wasn't that. It was something more pungent, more rotten. I cleaned the van thoroughly, scrubbing every surface and even changing out the floor mats. But no matter what I did, the smell wouldn't go away. In fact, it seemed to get worse, especially at night. I found myself driving with the windows down, trying to air it out, but it was as if the smell was seeping from the very metal of the van itself. Then one night, as I was driving home late from a job, I heard it for the first time, a faint thudding sound, coming from the back of the van. I glanced in the rearview mirror, but the back was empty. My tools were all secured, nothing loose that could be making the noise. The thudding continued, slow and rhythmic, like someone knocking from inside the van. I pulled over to the side of the road, my heart racing. I grabbed a flashlight and opened the back doors, half expecting to find some animal trapped inside. But there was nothing, just my tools and an empty cargo space. The noise stopped as soon as I opened the doors, and for a moment, I stood there in the dark, shining my flashlight around, trying to figure out what could have caused it. But there was nothing. Feeling uneasy, I closed the doors and got back in the van. But as soon as I started driving again, the thudding resumed. I didn't sleep well that night. The sound of that rhythmic knocking echoed in my head, keeping me awake. I told myself it was just my imagination, maybe something loose in the van that I hadn't noticed, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The next day, I took the van to a mechanic. I told him about the noise, and he spent the better part of the afternoon inspecting every inch of the van. He checked the suspension, the tires, the frame, everything. "There's nothing wrong with it," he said after finishing his inspection. "This van's in great shape." I left the mechanic shop feeling more confused than ever. The thudding noise hadn't happened while I was driving to the shop, and the mechanic hadn't heard it either. But I knew it was real. I wasn't imagining it. That night, the noise came back, louder than ever. And this time, it wasn't just knocking, it was voices. Faint, muffled voices, like whispers coming from the back of the van. I could hear them even over the sound of the engine. And no matter how loud I turned the radio, they wouldn't go away. I pulled over again, my hands shaking as I got out of the van. I opened the back doors, shining my flashlight into the empty cargo space. But this time, as I looked around, something caught my eye. There was a small, almost imperceptible seam in the floor of the van. I hadn't noticed it before, but now, in the dim light of the flashlight, I could see it clearly. It was a rectangular outline, like the edge of a hidden compartment. My heart pounded in my chest as I knelt down, running my fingers along the seam. It was barely visible, but when I pressed down, the floor shifted slightly. I grabbed a crowbar from my toolbox and pried at the edge of the compartment. With a loud creak, the hidden panel popped open, revealing a dark, shallow space beneath the floorboards. And inside that space, wrapped in old, tattered blankets, was a body. The smell hit me immediately, overwhelming, nauseating. It was the same smell I had noticed from the first day I got the van, but now it was 100 times worse. I stumbled back, gagging, as the realization of what I had just found sank in. I didn't wait around to see more. I slammed the compartment shut, jumped into the driver's seat, and sped away, my mind racing. I didn't know what to do. Call the police. Go back to Greg's house. I couldn't think straight. All I knew was that I had to get away from that van. But as I drove, the voices grew louder. The thudding, the whispers, they were all around me now, filling the van, filling my head. I couldn't escape them. I abandoned the van on the side of the road that night. I left it there, with the keys in the ignition, and never looked back. The next day, I reported it stolen, hoping that whoever found it would never uncover the horrible secret hidden beneath the floor. To this day, I don't know who that body belonged to, or how it ended up in that van. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear the faint sound of knocking in the distance. It all started when my friends and I decided to take a trip to a remote cabin we found on Craigslist. It was supposed to be a fun weekend getaway, just the four of us in the middle of nowhere, disconnected from the world and reconnecting with nature. But as I sit here now, typing this out with my heart still racing, I wish we had never gone. We were in our mid-20s, young enough to think we were invincible, but old enough to know that renting a cabin for dirt cheap off Craigslist might be risky. Still, the pictures in the ad looked amazing. A cozy log cabin nestled deep in the woods, right by a crystal, clear lake, and the price was almost too good to pass up. I was the one who found the listing. It popped up on my screen one evening while I was browsing for ideas for a weekend retreat. The owner, someone named Tom, wrote a brief but inviting description, saying the cabin was perfect for those looking for a peaceful escape and that it was isolated enough to feel truly alone. That part actually sounded appealing at the time. We all lived in the city, and getting away from the noise and chaos sounded like a dream. I reached out to Tom, and he responded almost immediately. He seemed friendly enough, offering to meet us in person to hand over the keys. He said he didn't live far from the cabin, but since he was busy with work, he'd only stop by quickly to show us around before leaving us to enjoy our weekend. It was set. My friends Ben, Katie, and Lucy, and I packed our bags and hit the road that Friday afternoon. The drive out of the city felt liberating, with the stress of work and life slipping away with every passing mile. We joked around, played music, and talked about how much we were looking forward to a few days of peace and quiet. The further we drove, the more rural the surroundings became. The last town we passed through was small and old-fashioned, with just one main street and a handful of shops. We stocked up on groceries and supplies there before heading into the woods. The road to the cabin was rough, nothing more than a narrow dirt path that wound through dense trees. The deeper we went, the darker it became, with the towering pines blocking out most of the late afternoon sun. There was no cell service by the time we reached the cabin, and the quiet was almost unsettling after being so used to the constant hum of city life. When we pulled up to the cabin, we were all pleasantly surprised. It looked exactly like the pictures, rustic but well maintained, with a wraparound porch that overlooked the lake. The water shimmered in the fading light, and the air smelled fresh and clean. It felt like we had found a little slice of paradise. Tom arrived about 10 minutes after we did. He pulled up in an old pickup truck and waved as he stepped out. He was older than I had expected, maybe in his mid-50s, with graying hair and a weathered face. He was polite, but there was something about him that put me on edge. Maybe it was the way he kept glancing at the cabin like he was trying to see it through our eyes. "Nice place, huh?" he said, jingling the keys in his hand. "Built it myself years ago. Haven't been up here in a while, though. Too busy these days." We nodded, making small talk as he showed us around. The cabin was simple but charming, 2 small bedrooms, a living room with a fireplace, and a fully stocked kitchen. There were a few old paintings on the walls, mostly landscapes and portraits that looked like they belonged to a different era. The furniture was worn but comfortable, and the place had a faint smell of wood smoke and pine. Tom gave us a brief rundown of how to operate the generator and where to find the emergency supplies. Before leaving, he handed me the keys and smiled. "Enjoy your stay. And one more thing," he added, his expression turning serious. "Don't go wandering too far into the woods. It's easy to get lost out here, especially at night." We all nodded, thinking nothing of it at the time. After all, who would want to wander around in the dark forest anyway? With Tom gone, we settled in for the weekend. The first night was perfect. We grilled some food, drank a few beers, and sat around the fire pit, laughing and telling stories. The air was cool, and the stars above were so bright it felt like we were in a planetarium. It was the kind of peaceful escape we had all been craving. But things started to get strange the next day. It began with small, almost insignificant things. We found scratches on the front door, deep, jagged marks that hadn't been there when we arrived. Ben joked that it was probably just some animal, maybe a raccoon or a bear. But none of us could figure out why a raccoon would try to claw its way through the door. Then there were the noises. At first, we heard them only at night, soft rustling sounds, like someone or something was moving through the trees just beyond the clearing. We figured it was wildlife, maybe deer or coyotes. But the sounds got closer, more deliberate, as if whatever was out there was circling the cabin, watching us. The second night, I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of footsteps on the porch. I froze listening, my heart pounding in my chest. They were slow, heavy footsteps, like someone was pacing back and forth. I glanced at the clock. It was 2:15 a.m. I lay there, barely breathing, wondering if I should wake the others. But before I could make a decision, the footsteps stopped. I waited, my ears straining for any sound, but everything went silent. After what felt like an eternity, I finally drifted back to sleep, convincing myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. The next morning, I told the others about the footsteps. Ben laughed it off, saying I probably just heard an animal, but Katie and Lucy looked uneasy. They had both heard strange noises during the night, too, scratching sounds, like something was trying to get inside. By the third day, things escalated. We spent most of the day hiking around the lake, trying to shake off the creepy feeling that had settled over us. But when we returned to the cabin in the late afternoon, we found the front door wide open. I know for a fact that I had locked it when we left. I remember checking the lock twice, just to be sure, but now it was open, swinging gently in the breeze. We stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. Ben was the first to speak. "Maybe Tom came back," he said, though even he didn't seem convinced. "Maybe he forgot something." We cautiously stepped inside, calling out Tom's name, but there was no answer. The cabin was eerily quiet, and everything seemed to be in place, except for one thing. The portrait in the living room, the one of the old man that had hung crooked on the wall since we arrived, was gone. At that point, we were all thoroughly freaked out. We spent the next hour searching the cabin, but there was no sign of the painting, no sign that anyone had been there at all. That night, we barely slept. Every sound seemed magnified, every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind rattling the windows. I kept expecting to hear those footsteps again, pacing back and forth on the porch, but they never came. Instead, we woke up to something far worse. The next morning, as we gathered our things to leave, we found it. The painting had returned, but this time, it was hanging on the inside of the front door. The man in the portrait was staring straight ahead, his eyes fixed on the spot where we stood. It hadn't been like that before. The first time I had seen it, his gaze had been off to the side, looking somewhere just out of view. Now, he was staring directly at us, his expression cold and menacing. We didn't stick around to figure out what it meant. We grabbed our bags, threw them into the car, and sped down the dirt road, not looking back until we reached the main highway. None of us said a word for the first hour of the drive, the silence heavy with the unspoken fear that hung between us. When we finally reached the town where we had stopped for groceries, I pulled out my phone and tried to call Tom. The number went straight to voicemail. I left a message, telling him we had left early and asking if he had come back to the cabin while we were gone, but I never heard back. In fact, when I tried to find the listing for the cabin again on Craigslist, it was gone. Just like that, it had vanished, as if it had never existed. To this day, I still don't know what happened at that cabin, and I don't think I ever want to find out. But one thing's for sure, I'll never rent anything off Craigslist again.